body, and announce that the council will meet in an executive session immediately following this meeting to review and evaluate employment-related performance of our city manager. We will not be coming back to session. So once we wrap up council comments, I'll adjourn the meeting and we'll go to executive session. So with that, I'll ask for a roll call, please.
Steve Clemens.
Here.
Gary Lillard.
Here.
John Bozarth.
Here.
David Glabe.
Here.
Nicole Howard. Here. Marianne Meisner. Here. Justin Rock.
Here.
Right, nothing on the dais relative
It
to.
was for everybody but you, Mayor, because you already had your copy of the evaluation.
Oh, that's
for the
what I
executive
forgot.
session. You didn't bring yours. I've got an extra copy.
Okay, thank you. Robert's talking about the information relative to the executive session, I believe. Okay. We have a consent agenda with 2 items. The first item is regular session minutes, and the second one is approving an OLCC liquor license for Tequila's Mexican restaurant. And I will entertain a motion, or if anyone wants to pull elements off of the
I move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Public comments before I open the dais to the general public. Chief Bell has an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council. It's my privilege to be able to introduce our newest police officer at Grande Police Department to you this evening. Ben Johnson was hired and sworn in as a City of Grande police officer on Monday, August 15th. Officer Johnson is a Grande native who attended and graduated from Grande High School. Prior to coming to work at LGPD, Officer Johnson worked for the U.S. Forest Service for 7 years, most recently at the Blue Mountain Interagency Fire Center in the fire cache. Officer Johnson is currently in field training and is scheduled to attend the 16-week Basic Police Academy in Salem in December of this year. We couldn't be happier to have Officer Johnson as a member of LGPD family and look forward to his continuing his law enforcement career in service to our community. So welcome, Officer Johnson. Thank you.
And I think Gary and I were at the swearing-in ceremony, so it's nice to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Thank you.
Marianne, we are fully staffed.
That was my next question.
First time in a long time. Okay.
We have no more introductions, so at this point, I'll invite anybody who has public comments related to non-agenda items. You're welcome to step to the podium and tell us what you think. All right, seeing no one, I'll move on from public comments. We have, let me get myself reoriented a little bit. We have 2 public hearings this evening. The first public hearing is an ordinance, first reading only, to establish time, place, and manner for operation of psilocybin service centers and manufacturers. I'll open the public hearing, and if I could have a reading of the rules of order, please.
These rules of order are applicable to the public hearing for a proposed ordinance establishing time, place, and manner restriction on psilocybin service centers and the manufacturing of psilocybin products. This is a legislative hearing, therefore counselor ex parte or pre-hearing contact does not apply. The hearing will proceed as follows. The mayor will open the public hearing and request the staff report. The mayor will then accept public testimony relating to the matter. There is a 3-minute time limit for testimony. The order of testimony this evening will begin with that of proponents, those in favor, followed by opponents, those opposed, and ending with those neutral to the ordinance being adopted. The proceedings are being electronically recorded to be converted to written minutes. When testifying, please step to the podium and clearly print your name and address on the speaker sign-in sheet. Please state only your name before addressing the council. Members of the city council may ask questions of the staff at any time, and subsequent to deliberation, the mayor will close the hearing.
Before I ask for staff report, I do want to remind people this is the first hearing, so we will not be making a decision this evening. We're simply taking input from staff and from public. We will come back for a second reading in October, and at that time, the council will vote and make a decision. So no voting this evening, just information gathering. Take it away, Mike.
Yeah, so just kind of a summary or reminder, this psilocybin discussion was part of the ballot measure 109 that legalized psychedelic mushrooms. Facilities will be able to be licensed and operational beginning in January, assuming they go through all the proper steps. Last month, the council passed an ordinance to put to the voters the decision as to whether to do a ban or not. And so that's headed to them in November. But at the council's direction and recommendation of staff is if that measure does not pass and the ban does not go into effect, then it's in the city's best interest to establish some time, place, and manner restrictions so that we can at least guide the location and some of the operational aspects of these businesses as they come in, since we're not really able to predict and regulate them in any other way. And so the ordinance that is before you is kind of that placeholder. We did the same thing with the marijuana restrictions when that ban went into place, as we have some time, place, and manner standards in place that we are not implementing in that scenario because the ban is still in effect. But the ordinance that is before you is modeled after that. Essentially, it's the exact same requirements that we have on the marijuana dispensaries and with a buffer from parks and schools and a buffer from each other and some other operational elements. And I guess with that, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions specifically for Mike. Does anyone else?
Well, the number 2 on number A, it seems like it's just repeating what you just said up above. Is it repetitive, or am I missing something when I was reading it? It seems like it's almost the first line of A.
Yeah, so number 1 deals with the 1,000 feet of schools, library, parks, community centers geared towards services to minors. Number 2 is a separation from other facilities, not from those children-oriented establishments.
So there can't be 2 service centers within 1,000 feet of each other.
Okay. Well, when I was reading it, I kept thinking it's the same thing, but I guess. Okay.
I think you could move 2 into a G on 1, and it would, but it's fine.
Any other questions
I think
for
I
Mike?
don't know.
Okay, with that, I invite public testimony. The first, anyone in favor of these guidelines for placement of service centers? Anyone opposed? Anybody neutral? It makes it pretty easy to move forward. Council discussion.
The only other thing I was kind of curious about, at our last meeting, there were a couple of you that had voted against the full ban. I wasn't sure if that was related to some of the comments that I had also made, or if there was something entirely different that we need to be taking into consideration.
I'm not recalling specifically
Okay.
some of my thinking at that time, but
Okay.
I don't know that that's germane to this. It's not going to influence the way I'm acting with this thing. This is a whole different, to me, this is a whole different
Sure.
ball of wax. So.
Right. Okay.
So this ordinance goes into, except it doesn't go into effect unless it is not accepted by the
If
Right.
the ballot measure fails,
right.
wait a second.
No,
If
let me
Correct.
clarify
Yeah,
that. So
yeah.
So regardless of whether the ballot measure passes or fails, this ordinance, if you adopt it next month, would go into effect.
Okay,
That's what I thought. Okay.
If the ballot measure passes, we would just not, this would still be in effect, but we just would not use it because it wouldn't be relevant until such time that the ban is reversed.
Okay.
Then it would become relevant at that time.
That's what I thought too. Yeah.
thank you for that clarification. Anything else for Mike? Okay, so this is, as I prefaced this particular action item, The public hearing will be continued until October 5th, 2022, which is our next regular council session, at which time we'll have the ordinance will be read by title only for a second time, and then we will vote and take action. But at this point, we're done with the matter. All right, moving on to the next one,
Mayor?
Mike. I think you're up with this one as well.
We got, she needs to read the ordinance by title only.
Thank you. I highlight everything and I forgot to highlight that one.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of LaGrande, Union County, Oregon, establishing time, place, and manner restriction on psilocybin service centers and the manufacture of psilocybin products and declaring an effective date.
Okay, thank you. I circled the next one, so we're good. All right, this is our second public hearing, and this is an ordinance, again, for first reading, and to hear about potential for a moratorium on, and I'm gonna change the wording a little bit because and I'll tell you why in a second. This is about a moratorium on new temporary rentals. I'm gonna call it that way. Airbnbs is a brand name, and we all know what that means, but it's also a brand. And it's I don't want to use that term because this is much more general than that. It's not just Airbnbs in town. It's all temporary rentals that we're talking about. Is that a better way to think about it, Mike?
Well, I'd use the word short-term rental.
Yeah.
Short term.
That's more of a
Okay.
national
So
standard.
with that, I'll open the public hearing and ask for a reading of the rules of order, please.
And now I have bed and breakfast inns in my wording, so short-term rental.
Please use bed and breakfast because that is what our code refers to it as.
Okay. Yep, thank you.
These rules of order are applicable to the public hearing for a proposed ordinance establishing a temporary moratorium on bed and breakfast inns. This is a legislative hearing, therefore counselor ex parte or pre-hearing contact does not apply. The hearing will proceed as follows. The mayor will open the public hearing and request a staff report. The mayor will then accept public testimony relating to the matter. There is a 3-minute time limit for testimony. The order of testimony this evening will begin with that of proponents, those in favor, followed by opponents, those opposed, and ending with those neutral to the ordinance being adopted. The proceedings are being electronically recorded to be converted to written minutes. When testifying, please step to the podium and clearly print your name and address on the speaker's sign-in sheet. Please state only your name before addressing the council. Members of the City Council may ask questions of the staff at any time. Subsequent to deliberation, the mayor will close the hearing.
All right. Mike?
Okay, so just to kind of go back to the bed and breakfast terminology. So that dates back to at least our 93 code, if not before, back when the traditional bed and breakfast offered, breakfast.
Bed and breakfast.
Yeah, so that, and that terminology is stuck with us all the way up until today. But that industry has evolved to vacation rentals, to the traditional Airbnb that you book online, to the old-fashioned bread and breakfast where they actually serve a meal. So all of them are short-term rentals, and our code defines all of them exactly the same, and we just use the bed and breakfast term.
Okay.
It is on our list for code amendments to change that terminology to short-term rentals in order to update our code to be more consistent with the industry and how the industry has changed. And so that is on the docket to be evaluated, but for now, anyway, bed and breakfast inns cover everything.
Okay.
And Mike, just so I understand, this is fewer than 30 days.
Yes, a short-term rental is anything, I think it's less, I don't know if it's 30 days or less, but it's less than 30 days for sure. Yeah, once you get into that over 30 days, it's essentially a long-term rental residential use. And so the request that's before you is to do a short-term moratorium on short-term rentals or bed and breakfast inns, exclusively limited to the conversion of a dwelling unit to a rental or to a short-term rental. It does not include any of the uses of like an accessory structure or like a daylight basement, some extra space in a residential home where you have an owner, manager occupied facility. So this is really geared towards where there's a loss of a dwelling unit in our community and converting it to a commercial use, essentially to a lodging use, bed and breakfast. So that's the request that's before you. And this kind of started with the Planning Commission a couple years ago, and it was fairly minor at the time. But over the last couple years, we've just had a significant influx in applications for bed and breakfast inns and for the short-term rentals. And just prior to that, or around the same time, we were also completing our housing needs study and our production strategy, all which focus the city's priority on trying to create new housing. And the study that we've adopted and that we're tasked with implementing is calling for 800 new housing units over the next 20 years. And so in the report that's before you and in the discussion that we had at our work session with the Planning Commission, that roughly amounts to 336 single-family homes over the next 20 years, which is a little over 16, almost 17 houses per year, single-family homes per year, or over the last 2+ years that since we adopted the study, we should have seen about 50 homes up to this point constructed. And, that doesn't really take the economy into consideration, but that's kind of the target of where we should be right now, is having 50 new homes. And in that period of time, we've only seen 26, but we've lost 18 of our existing homes to short-term rentals. And so that overall, we've seen a gain of 8 new homes or 8 new dwelling units where we're supposed to be at, the 50 mark. And so that has raised a lot of concerns with the Planning Commission, is how are we supposed to achieve our housing goals and incentivize new housing when at the same time we're pushing and allowing bed and breakfast without, much consideration for the impacts that it's having on our community. And the information before you is very focused on the data related to housing needs analysis and how our housing is impacted. The data that we do not have a lot of information on, that is not included in here. You do have a letter from a citizen that has to share some concerns, but we don't have a lot of information on how does it actually affect the neighborhoods and the community and the place of a neighborhood. And a lot of cities are grappling with that, and the Planning Commission has talked about that. We have a lot of concerns with that as well, but we don't know how to get a handle on what does that really mean and how do you measure that. And so with the Planning Commission work session, the Planning Commission is asking that we do the short-term moratorium so that we can evaluate and develop standards to address our housing needs, but as well as how do we address standards for how many B&Bs do we want in our community? And how close should they be together? How many should be in a specific neighborhood? Should there be a size? Should there is the parking issues that we have concerns about? Are we requiring adequate parking? Are we, so there's a lot of impacts that we're not addressing right now because we don't have a standard. And a lot of communities, not just in the state, are doing moratoriums that try to grapple and address the same things. But this is kind of a nationwide challenge right now that's happening everywhere. And so we're looking at just a partial moratorium on just some of these rentals and the opportunity to draft some code and get some code adopted. So at least as we move forward, we're doing this with some thought and not just letting kind of nature take its course and we just get what we get. And then we have to do damage control later. And so we're hoping to at least do some planning ahead of time and hopefully prevent some conflicts rather than have to try to reverse and solve them later.
I have several questions. The first one is just to make sure everybody understands what you say, a partial moratorium. This is only on single-family dwelling units that might be brought forward for use as bed and breakfast in, right?
Yeah, it could be a duplex, it could be a multifamily unit.
Okay,
It's an existing dwelling unit that is being converted to a short-term rental,
that is not owner occupied.
right? If the property is owner occupied, which you generally would see in a single family dwelling,
Right.
then those are the ones that you would not see the moratorium apply to.
Right. So if somebody had a daylight basement, or they had a building in the back of their home that was,
An accessory dwelling that,
okay. So those, the daylight basement accessory dwelling would not be included in this moratorium.
correct.
Okay. The other question is, the moratorium is temporary. Are we talking about, we're talking about 120 days? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, currently it's proposed based on state law, it's 120 days. And at the end of this 120 days, I'll be coming back to you, assuming you support this. I'll be coming back to you in 120 days with information from the Planning Commission. This is the effort that we have been making, and this is what we're hoping to do to mitigate or solve some of these concerns. And can almost guarantee that if we have something like that, we'll be asking for an extension of the moratorium to allow us to go through the code adoption process to actually adopt and implement those. And that amount of time, I'll actually have a timeline structured out, so I'll know, but it'll likely be a 5 to 6 month request would be my best guess, just because that's what it takes to go through a code amendment process in Oregon. And so that's what I anticipate asking for if we do not start the adoption process before the 120 days, which, may be possible depending on, how we do.
So in the data that you provided us in our council packet, under duplexes, you indicate that there were 2 dwelling units lost to the conversion. How do you account for the possibility that half the duplexes, the owner is in it, and then they own the building, but they live in one side and they open the other one? That one seems kind of.
It's a separate dwelling unit. So
Okay.
even if it wouldn't be any different than if you own 4 homes around the city.
Okay.
You just happen to own 2 homes that are connected in the
All right.
case of a duplex.
Because I think about, an accessory building as being kind of the same thing. I mean, you're on the same property, but that building is separated.
Yeah, but the accessory dwelling unit is not defined, or technically under state law, it's not a dwelling unit the same as a duplex or a house. It has special considerations. We're not allowed to count it as a dwelling unit for land use purposes. It's kind of a freebie, and it could be a home office. It could be an apartment for guests to come and stay at your house, or you could rent it out to a college student or somebody in town if you wanted to. So it's just accessory to the house. It's no different than a garage or a shed for code purposes.
Wouldn't it get its own address then if you were renting it out?
Not necessarily. And so that's a kind of a different kind of a dilemma is how do we deal with the addressing piece? But that's a whole nother conversation as people wanting multiple addresses for one property is how do you deal with that? But
Yeah. Okay.
The last question about the data that you gave us, you've lost 3 dwelling units in a multifamily complex. So when I think of multifamily, I think of 3 or more living areas. So does that mean that somebody has an owner of one of those apartment complexes has said, okay, I'm going to designate these 3 apartments as temporary dwelling with temporary rentals?
yeah, so let me just think of an apartment complex with 10 or 20 units, and 2 or 3 of those are now converted. Those dwelling units are now converted to a short-term rental.
Okay.
So that's what that refers to.
Theoretically, then somebody who owned a 20 apartment complex could convert the whole thing.
Depending on your zoning. So we have in our code, we allow, and it's more of an interpretation issue, at the Planning Commission level, but you can have up to 5 guest bedrooms in a B&B in a short-term rental. And we have viewed one property as one short-term rental. And so for applicants that are coming in and they're asking for a second application to have a second unit on their property, that's still one short-term rental by definition. You just now have 2 bedrooms that you're renting out separately, essentially in different buildings. We're still viewing it as one short-term rental application. And I realize it's confusing, but what it does, it limits the number of bedrooms to 5 on a particular piece of
Okay,
property.
so if you had,
Is how that works.
you had a 20 rental unit, you could only have 5 of those units.
5 bedrooms. So in the case of this multifamily one, if you have two bedrooms and a 1 bedroom, that's 5 bedrooms. So that's how it amounts to 3 in
Okay.
this scenario.
Okay,
If you had a 3-bedroom unit and a 2-bedroom unit, now you only get 2.
gotcha. All right, so it's by bedroom. Okay,
Yeah, and so just, not overcomplicate it, but for applicants that have 2 dwellings like a duplex, and they want to rent both of them out, it depends on how many bedrooms those duplexes have. If they're 2-bedroom units, that's 4 bedrooms in
Okay.
that application.
I think I got that now. I'm glad you know what's in that building when you accept the,
Well, that's part of what we ask for in the application.
Right.
So it gets a little complicated.
And I'm just wanting to make sure that this ordinance that you're talking about is only for new applicants. It is not affecting anybody who already has.
Correct.
Is that correct? I
That's
just want to make
correct.
sure that everybody knows that. It's
Yeah,
only for new
yeah. So existing operators are not impacted by
Okay.
this.
A related question to that, if we should pass this moratorium, isn't there a waiting period before it's actually implemented?
So that's going to be the decision that I'll be asking you to make next month. And so process-wise, under state law, we have a 45-day notice to provide to the state, which is why you're not asked to make a decision tonight. Tonight is just a public information and a discussion meeting. Next month is is where that 45 days kicks in, and will be, I don't know if it'll be day 47 or 50, but your public hearing in October will be the soonest you can make a decision on the moratorium. And at that time, you'll be asked to consider an emergency clause to make it effective immediately so that we don't lose any additional housing. Or, you could pass it as we do our traditional ordinances, and then there's a 30-day waiting period before that ordinance goes into effect. And until that effective time, our office will be accepting applications, and every application will be in advance of the moratorium and would be a valid application for processing and considering.
Are there communities in the state that already have one of these in place? And if so, what are they experiencing?
I don't really know what they're experiencing per se, but there are several that have these in place, and I think most of them have an emergency clause that they put into their ordinance. But there's a lot of them that do have ordinances in place, and then there's several that are actually in process right now to establish those. And most of the cities that I've been communicating with are actually doing full bans. They're not just doing partial like we're looking at. Since our focus is on the housing need, our focus has been on just the loss and conversion to housing, where other communities are just looking at a total pause in order to look at all elements, including impacts to neighborhoods and how that affects the quality of a neighborhood and so forth.
All right, thank you.
any other questions from Mike? All right, I suspect that there are a number of people who want to speak on this element. So we're going to take this in order in favor of this moratorium. First, people that are in favor of the moratorium. Getting a little bit of feedback. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Bill Riley. I submitted written testimony to you, so I'm not going to go over that again. But we need a moratorium. This thing is so confusing that you can't even begin your discussion about it without fumbling around. You know what I mean? We don't have the words that work to describe what we're talking about. Number one. So what we need is some time to sort this thing out. And also understand what we're talking about in terms of what these are little motels and nobody lives in them. It's not like, these are the people that are staying in the hotels and the motels downtown and out on the strip. Okay. But they're staying in dwellings, short-term housing in our neighborhoods, but nobody else is there. I put a sort of a horror story in the written testimony that I gave to you that happened over in Bend. That was because my kids were living there at the time, and there were stories they were telling me about their friends living next door to week-long drunken parties that, you know, if somebody had been living in that place, those things wouldn't have happened. So the big divide here about these short-term rentals, whatever we end up calling them, is some of these people live in there and they're basically okay. Some, nobody lives in there and they're basically not okay. And I think that's where you find the trouble happening in some of the other cities, just in terms of the people that live next to these places in the neighborhood, like me.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay.
That was a nicely written comment too, by the way.
Yes.
Excuse me?
Nicely written comment that you gave us too.
Oh, thank you. You're not going to have questions this time, are you?
Do you have questions for us?
No, but I mean, I gave you that writing, and if you have questions for
Yes.
me about it, this isn't the time for that, though, is it?
If any counselors have questions about what Bill submitted, I think it would be appropriate to ask them now. The only thing that I have a question for is, does that testimony get put into the record on this item? Okay. I don't have any question for you, Bill. I do appreciate what you wrote and gave me a good perspective of what's happening. Just for clarification, you have 2 of these temporary rental units around you?
Yep, and an application for a third one on the second city, 2 crammed into one city lot, one small city lot, right across my fence, 20 feet away from my house. Yeah, one out my front door in those 2. And I don't want them.
Thank you. Anything else? Anyone else? Thank you, Bill. Anyone else like to speak in favor of this moratorium?
Hi, I'm Bev Calder. I own Bella Mercantile. I do live in Baker City, but I support it from the perspective of an employer. And housing is kind of the big issue. I've been talking to other small independent business owners in the last couple of weeks in Bend and Ontario and Boise and Ketchum, and we are all in the same boat. I mean, many people have employees who are camping, who are couch surfing because they can't find a place to live. And you are very aware of just how shorthanded everyone is in every industry right now. But I have said for the last couple of years, housing is the reason that we don't have workers. There's nowhere to live. And so it's really important that we protect the housing inventory that we have for people who we need to have in our community to continue the tourism. I mean, I know that the rentals are great for tourism, but they go hand in hand with people working. So thank you.
Anyone else like to speak in favor of the moratorium? All right. Anyone like to speak in opposition?
I don't know if it's an opposition, kind of on the fence.
That would be neutral, and that would be the next one. If you'd like to speak to that, that'd be fine. I need you to come up here. Thank you.
Do I need to state my name or?
There's a form there if you can fill it out, and then all we need is your name.
Okay. So I don't own an Airbnb. I do, however, clean an Airbnb. And knowing that I'm in that part of the business, I get notifications all the time. I've seen what we have in our community and what is being converted into an Airbnb. There are a lot of apartments. The new apartments where the Observer building is at, they are being converted into Airbnbs. That is a living space that can be utilized by someone who can live there. but instead they're Airbnbs. So that part I can understand. That's something that shouldn't be accepted, in my opinion. If it's a dwelling, if you live in it, I understand that, you live in the building, you can, maintain what's there, what's not. If you don't like what's going on, you can kick them out. It's your business. I mean, that's your place. And as far as Airbnbs being around in the neighborhood, I have neighbors that live on both sides of me that are rental units. I don't like my neighbors, but I can't pick my neighbors. And those are long-term rentals. So whether it's people that are coming and going or people that are constantly there, you're going to like them or you're not going to like them. It's as simple as that. I don't see there being an issue with an Airbnb. I don't think the moratorium, or however word is said, is necessary. But regulation, yes, if it's an apartment building, and I know that there's at least 2 bedrooms in each of those apartment buildings. There's at least a handful of them in the new building where the Observer is or was. So I'm constantly watching it. And as far as comparing our community to Bend, Ontario, or Boise, there's none, because we are our community. We're Union County. We're not anything like Bend. We're not anything like Ontario, and we're not anything like Boise. Those are bigger spaces. There's more people living there. So we should not be comparing our community to larger cities, because there's nothing in common there. We are our own entity, and that's just where it should be. People shouldn't be worrying about what's going on outside of our town. We should need to start focusing on what's going on in our town and how to maintain what's already existing. That's my argument.
Okay. Could I get your name, please?
Yeah.
Or just you can tell us too.
I'm Cassiopeia Smith, and I am a homeowner. And like I said, I clean an Airbnb, and there are 2 dwellings on that property. And I get to see everything that's going on. There's a long-term rental and there's a short-term rental on the same property. And it's also up to the host to choose who they allow on that property and who they allow not to. So it is a choice. It's not something that we just say, okay, well, this person seems great. We do look at reviews. We do go off of what's being said and how they're presenting themselves to us. We've had a couple people that have told us that they need to stay in the dwelling, but then they need to extend our stay when we already have someone that's already prepaid to come in. So if we extend that stay, how can we guarantee that those people that want to come in will leave when we need them to? There's no guarantee. So that's something that we kind of have to skip over. But that's a choice. It's just like, a rental company. They're going to pick who they feel they need to put into that unit. And again, I haven't chosen my neighbors, and if I could choose them, I would have much better neighbors than what I've got. So
Done that. Thank
yes.
you. Appreciate that. Anyone else like to speak in neutral? Okay. So fill out the form and state your name and let us have it.
My name is Monica McLaughlin. I'm neutral as well for a couple reasons. I am opening up a Airbnb out of a downstairs bedroom, so this would not apply to me. But I also work at the lodge at Hot Lake Springs, and I worked front desk there. They rent out their rooms through Airbnb. It is a hotel, so I think it falls in line. It wouldn't really, have to do with this, but they use Airbnb because, like Cassie was saying, you can read reviews. If you do not have a valid driver's license, or if you don't pass Airbnb's background check, you are kicked off Airbnb. That is something, like, there's no getting around it. You're just kicked off. You have to send in your ID. So unless you get a complete name change, different picture, you're not going to be allowed back onto Airbnb. That's why they use it, and that's appealing. I worked front desk. That's appealing to me. Okay, this guy did something horrible, or female did something horrible at a previous Airbnb. They are now kicked off Airbnb. So I'm neutral because I see both sides, but short-term rentals or long-term rentals, I own one in Kentucky. I own a townhouse in Lexington, Kentucky. I've had great tenants and I have had horrible tenants. I wish I had something like Airbnb that would tell me, I mean, yes, you can do a background check, call a landlord, but I did that and also didn't have a great tenant. So that is a more surefire way to find out if someone is a good tenant or not, I believe. So still neutral. I don't
Yep.
really know. But
That's interesting information. I haven't often rented through Airbnb, but I know when I did, I was evaluated.
Mhm.
So the person that I rented from rated me,
correct.
and I didn't realize that would have an impact on
Mhm.
my subsequent use of that service.
Yeah. People can deny you if they don't like
Right.
what your
But
reviews say.
there's also our VRBO and
Mhm.
Vacasa and probably 2 or 3 others. And
Mhm.
they don't have that kind of rating system. At
And
least
my-
they all did.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, good, fine.
My other point, I also work for the Chamber of Commerce and interested in bringing tourism into town. There are no downtown hotels minus the Landing. How are people supposed to see how LaGrandians downtown live if there's not a place downtown where they can actually experience that fully? Yes, you can walk downtown, see the streets, restaurants, but I'm talking staying downtown. So that's another thought, that unless we have these different Airbnbs, they're not going to get that Main Street feel.
Thank you.
But how many of our Airbnbs are downtown, located close to downtown? I
We
have
will
no
be
idea.
having one open in the next month with mine. I live a 10-minute walk from downtown.
Well, I can see that.
But I'm not sure. I've looked at the map and seen where they are, but not that close.
Yeah,
But I can let you know.
Yeah, I would be curious, where'd you have that map? Because I asked Mike if there was a map of the location of rentals in town. and-
Airbnb.
So it looks on Airbnb and it'll kind
Okay.
of show you
Yeah.
LaGrande. And then if you book it, it'll tell you the exact
Gotcha.
address.
But you would have to, in order to know all of them in town, you would have to look at all of the online rental services that are out there.
I believe so. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
absolutely.
You wouldn't be able to get the addresses of the properties unless you actually book it, but it gives you a general location of where the available rentals are that are open on the dates that you place.
Thank you
Okay,
for your time.
thank you. Anyone else? Council comments or discussion?
Did we ever get, and I think you were just tending toward this point, but do we know how many of these are in LeGrand right now?
What do you mean,
Total,
these?
the
Short-term
total number of
Total short-term
bed and
rentals.
breakfast inns, as we are defining them, in their totality, not just single-family dwelling units.
Well, I had the table that, I don't have it in front of me, but I put the table out that we had 30-some permits, applications that had been approved. We don't have the means to really go out and monitor which ones are currently active at any one moment.
Do they pay room tax?
They do, and that's
Okay,
part,
so by paying the room tax, don't you keep track of that? Who does that?
so that our finance does that, and that's part of the challenge, is because not all of them are paying. And so that's part of the challenge in answering your question, is how many do we have? Is I could tell you how many we have permitted and compare them with who's paying transient room tax. But then there's also a number of them out there that, folks are just kind of dabbling in it and haven't gotten caught. And so they're going to be kind of stuck in an enforcement role as they
How do
are
you know
encountered.
that, Mike?
Because our finance folks periodically will go online and they find them. And that's how some of our applications
So if
come
you are
in.
finding those people, why isn't that enforced then?
Well, it is enforced when we find them. It's not as easy as it sounds. We do find them and we go through a process, and some of the ones that we have permitted are because we found them and advise them that there is a permit process, and they go through it, and now they have a permit and they are paying their tax, and that's.
Just logistically, it would be really hard to go through 5 platforms for all dates, because you can put in some dates, but those dates may not be available, so those properties won't appear.
And unless you book it,
Yeah.
you don't know the location. And so there's a best guess based on the pictures that are provided in there. It's like, oh, I recognize that house.
Right.
And that's how some of them are found. But there's some out there that have not been identified that we're still, looking. So it's challenging.
I think that's one of the things we really need to get a handle on. I don't know how you do it, but if you've got known permits, then you've got them lined out, and you get them on the map somehow, and then do some sleuthing on the rest of them. One last question, and unless other counselors, how long is the permit valid for? So somebody comes in and they've got a resident or property that they can convert to short-term rental. How long is that permit valid for?
Well, as long as the person is exercising that permit, operating that, it's valid forever.
Okay.
It runs with the property and it transfers to the next person and it goes forever and ever, as long as they continue it. If they discontinue it, there's a 1-year time period where if you discontinue a use for that 1-year period of time, then you lose that.
Okay.
That kind of grandfathered scenario.
I don't want to. I think that's off topic for tonight. Tonight is whether we do a moratorium, not what existing situation is.
Yeah. One clarification I want to make, because one of the comments made, just related to the B&Bs that are in the commercial areas. Those are not impacted by this moratorium. So, and those are actually a lot easier to get permitted because a lodging use is permitted outright in all of our commercial zones. And so folks that go through that process, they don't go before the planning commission, and it's an administrative process, and it's a lot easier for folks that are in a commercial area to do this kind of.
So the building, the Observer apartment complex, I think you mentioned.
That's different. That's residentially zoned, and that's the example actually that we were discussing in the apartment numbers that for your question earlier.
Okay. Nicole?
For
go ahead.
Mike, you wanted 120 days and you made a quick reference to some reason for that number. Is that the maximum amount of time you can request?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so the 120 days is written in law. So and then at the end of the 120 days, then that could be extended, assuming the conditions continue to exist and we're making progress towards some kind of mitigation or solution. And so that'll be the discussion we would have, assuming you support this and we go that direction.
Fair enough.
But just to clarify, you're anticipating requesting an additional 5 to 6 months after that 120 days is over to implement.
That's just based on what I know today, because that is the time period it roughly takes to go through a code amendment process to change our code. So if we're able to start that process before the 120 days, then I would ask for a lesser amount of time if we're on track to through that processing. But there's also other code amendments that the Planning Commission is working on, and there's a big list. And so a lot of that also has to do with how do we bundle that? Are we going to do this through multiple processes? Are we going to bundle them all together? And how does that timing look? And so that's the conversation we'll have in 120 days is what do you want to do with that? And so
120 days, Mike, is not very long.
it is not.
And you have a lot of work, and the Planning Commission has a lot of work ahead of you during that 120 days.
Yeah, well, the Planning Commission meets, just for your reference, they meet next week. And so they do have an application that they're going to be considering for a short-term rental. And then there's a couple of them also scheduled in October. But each of these Planning Commission meetings are scheduled to then adjourn into a work session to work specifically on this issue. And depending on how far they go on this, will kind of be determined in October based on what your decision is on October is do they continue these discussions in their work session in October, or do they move on to other code amendments based on how things need to be prioritized? But anyway.
Okay, thank you. Unless anybody else has questions for Mike, I'm going to say that our discussion will continue on October 5th, 2022. And at that point, we'll have a second reading and we'll vote on whether or not to put the moratorium in place. So tonight, we're kind of done with discussion. And I will ask for a reading of the ordinance by title only.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of LaGrande, Union County, Oregon, establishing a temporary moratorium on bed and breakfast inns and declaring an emergency.
All right, so no unfinished business. We have one item of new business, and that is, boy, I'm loving this one. Awarding a bid for Grande and Inlay project on Geckler Lane
Yes.
from 4th to Aries.
Correct.
Does anybody think that needs to be done? Maybe not, you know. Maybe,
I vote with my whole self.
yeah, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilors. So the action form, as Steve so eloquently put, is to consider the award for the contract for the Grande and Inlay of Geckler Lane. So if you remember during the budgeting process, we set aside some funds from the general fund. Those are spelled out in the action form. Just to cover real quick, for $358,000 roughly came from the URA underlevy. $116,000 was unanticipated increases in general fund. The remainder was made up through one of our programs we run through the state, which is the STP program, which is federal dollars that are run through the state financing. So the staff put on a bid process. We got 2 qualified bids. That's not irregular for these types of projects. The grinding portion is pretty specialized. Also, we don't have a lot of local pavers who bid these projects. As you can see, our estimate was pretty close to our low bidder. So I think we came in with pretty good numbers, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
When will this begin?
You know how the bidding process works. Until you guys allow me to award it, I cannot talk to them about schedule, costs, any of that. So how it'll work is if you guys move forward with considering and allowing Robert Tenner into this agreement, we will put out a 7-day notice for people to put in any disputes. And then next Wednesday, we'll award the contract and start talking with the contractor to get it done.
Before the winter?
That's the hope.
What exactly is the pollution control plan?
A pollution control plan is a requirement from the state. Basically, the contractor has to outline how they are going to protect the environmental aspects of our project. So in a Grande and Inlay, it's going to cover things like air quality, any kind of discharges that are going to go into surrounding streams or stormwater. And it's basically just saying, you know, what actions are they going to take to protect the public from those environmental issues?
So do you have any idea why there's such a discrepancy between the 2 bids?
It depends on, you know.
$500 doesn't seem like much to do that.
So High Desert and Aggregate is based out of Bend mainly they probably have a canned one for this type of project. So they just go in, do the search and find, change the names of the roads, and then they submit it. So
So are you saying they won't be really controlling pollution? Or are you saying that they've absorbed that cost into one of these other numbers?
well, usually what it is there's pretty straightforward use on the environmental aspects of a Grande and an Inlay. You know, you're going to take care of the air, so you lay out what you're going to be doing during cleaning. We're going to run a water truck to knock down the dust, and then we're going to sweep it up with a, mechanical sweeper. We're going to protect catch basins by using straw wattles. So there isn't a whole lot of individual aspects when it comes to the project itself that they have to actually go in and take a look at. Ours might be a little interesting because we do have some open ditch stormwater there. So they'll go through and they'll look at those, but it's not unlikely that that's a situation they haven't faced on a previous project. So it's just cut and paste into the report and then submit it over to us for review.
But I think what Nicole is asking, and perhaps John is alluding to, is that they're actually, for $3,000 difference, they're going to do what they need to do in terms of pollution control. They've just got the system down maybe tighter than the other bidder.
Probably.
Okay. I have technical questions. What is a 1/2-inch asphalt concrete pavement mixture?
So that is how the state calls out the bidding process. So the level 2 designates the type of rock sizes that are in the gradation, the type of oil that we're going to use, because you have to use a different oil on the east side of the state to the west side because of the temperatures that we see. 1/2 inch is the largest size of the aggregate inside the asphalt mixture. So we have up to 1/2 inch. ACP is just the asphalt concrete pavement. So that's just state's way they make us call it out.
Okay, because what I said, wait a minute, you're going to take it down 3 inches and you're only going to put a 1/2 inch back? That doesn't sound right. So the 1/2 inch refers to the aggregate inside the material.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
I have,
Go ahead, Marianne.
I have one question. If they can't get onto it right away, are you planning on filling those holes that are out there?
I think we can do that.
Okay, because it's,
Otherwise, you could
really have
lose
to
a small
dodge around
car.
out there.
We're going for mid-size.
Yeah.
Okay, just asking because you really have to dodge out there.
Yes.
Kyle, just because, Geckler is one of our main arterials there, and we've already got road closures currently to the hospital. Do you have a sense of timing on this, how long the road may be closed and how that would impact those traveling to the hospital from the south side?
So preliminary talks with contractors during the bidding process is we really lean toward having no complete closures during the whole aspect of the project. So there will likely be flagging, there will be limited closures, but it's kind of, we're going to take one side at a time and then open it up at the end of the workday and for weekends. That's the early anticipation on the bids. Now, when we go into the negotiations and we sit down and start looking at the traffic control plan, we can approve different closures, but that was the intent that was given to the bidders early on, is that there would be no complete closures. Back when we were talking with the hospital about this closure, they were well aware of not only this project likely happening, but also 2nd Street. So it really impacted the way the hospital set up their traffic control plan in anticipation of multiple of our road projects through the next year.
Thanks for anticipating.
Any other questions? All right, Kyle, thank you. Open the podium to anybody who would like to make public comment on this. All right, seeing nothing from the public, council discussion or motion.
I move that we award Geckler Lane Grande and Inlay project to High Desert Aggregate and Paving in the amount of $517,615 as shown in the bid summary, and further that City Manager Strope be authorized to execute the contract documents for the bid for the 2022 Grande and Inlay project, Geckler Lane, 4th Street to Aries Lane.
Second.
Second, did somebody second?
Yes, Dave seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Geckler gets a new look. Thank you very much, Kyle.
Thank God.
Moving on, staff comments. Chief Bell.
So we spoke a little bit earlier about staffing update. I just wanted to give you some information. We're fully staffed now, but we're really not realizing that just yet because we have some folks that are still in training and will need to be for a period of time. A positive thing that I wanted to share with you was we have Officer Aaron Clark going to graduate from the Basic Police Academy on Friday of this week, which means, and he's done with all of his in-house training. So when he comes back to work next week, he'll be rolling around in a police car taking calls for service. So that's a movement in the right direction. Officer Johnson and Officer Garrett Jones both have to still attend the police academy. So we won't realize the full, capacity of full staffing until, honestly, Officer Jones is not due to graduate from the police academy until June of 2023. So staffing update.
Okay, thank you. But we have officers, and that's good. Moving in the right direction. Any other staff comments? City manager comments?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a reminder, we have the ARPA funding virtual town hall meeting work session scheduled for the 14th of September, which I believe is next Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Council will be in this room. We are receiving emails and correspondence from individuals that we will be sharing during that session. One of the interesting things, just as an aside, is I got one in earlier today from someone from Island City with suggestions on how we might want to spend those dollars. So it's always kind of fun when you get something from someone that isn't a resident of your community suggesting how you should spend your local dollars. And of course, we'll share that information with you as part of the packet. And that was the only thing I wanted to touch on. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Robert, how much has been advertised out so the public knows how to get onto this?
Sure. Yeah, so we did a press release. It's currently the banner on the city's website. The Observer did a very nice article about it that talked to it. The Observer did actually an editorial advocating that the community participate in the discussion. So this will be the third time that it'll be referenced in the paper within the last couple months, in terms of the fact that we're looking at this. And again, we're getting some input from people that we typically don't hear from on things, which is good.
So do they know how to access it is what I'm asking. Yeah. Because I don't remember seeing it, but I'm sure I read the article, so I should have seen it. But
yeah, it's there. It's on the city's website, and it is the same way that all of the same access for our normal city council meeting. And there's also an email, which it's arpa@cityoflegrand.org.
Okay.
That goes to, I think, myself and to Stacy and maybe to Kayla. So I literally got one this afternoon with someone making a suggestion on how we might want to use those dollars.
Okay. Because somebody asked me how to do it, and I said, well, I know it's there, but I just have to find it.
And if you can't remember that, just have them call our office, and Stacy or Kayla, I can take the information or give them an email address to send to us. So and it doesn't necessarily have to go to that ARPA email. If you want to just jump on and have it sent to the city manager, that works. And then during the meeting itself, we'll be monitoring that email address, and we'll be monitoring the Facebook comments. And people can enter comments in, and we'll capture those and toss them out there. One of the things that we'll probably do in the interest of time, I have several that have said, spend money on streets, spend all the money on streets. Some of them have said, spend money on 16th Street specifically. So what we'll probably do is take the redundant comments and capture those together and identify how many and the individuals that submitted those, as opposed to reading 5 emails that say essentially the same thing.
Okay.
So, Robert, I have a question about this. Are other government entities receiving ARPA money?
Yes.
So other communities in the county.
Yes.
And the county itself is receiving money.
Yes.
Are you aware of any of those entities doing something like this?
I'm sure that there are, but I don't know that anybody in Union County is doing it to the extent that we have.
Okay. Personally, I think that says something for what we're doing. Is we're opening ourselves to public comments and input about what to do with this money. I have some thoughts. I have some strong thoughts on where it should go. But I'm really open to see what kind of input we get from people. So next Wednesday night is an opportunity for people to hear more about these projects, but also to have some say on where that money should go. So, and if you like that, you should talk to other government entities that have received the same money and are doing something similar. So, okay. With that, anything else for Robert?
No, thank you.
Okay, Justin,
I'm good this evening.
Marianne,
I don't have anything.
Gary,
Thanks.
Cole,
I'm going to put a plug in for Celebrate LeGrand, which is tomorrow evening from 5 to 7 p.m. There is a venue change to Riverside Park.
Yes.
Please come, bring yourselves, bring your families. This is a very family-friendly event and a way to celebrate what it means to live in our community.
3 hot dogs, ice cream, and soda, if I remember right.
Yep.
John? Okay.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
Kyle, I was curious, now that we have the good news about Geckler Lane, are there any other major projects we might have some good news on, like 2nd Street? Or
I can tell you the potholes in Riverside Park have been filled.
Good. I keep hearing people say things to me about that, so thank you.
I think since in the last month and a half, I think we've completed about 4 million.
Kyle, could you go to the podium?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think in the last month and a half, we've completed about 4 major paving operations around town. So I think we have maybe 1 or 2 more streets on the docket for the rest of the year. We were over today doing some paving at the fire department for some training grounds, and we have 1 outstanding task we need to do, and then we'll get back on them. 2nd Street is scheduled for the spring, so we're looking at continuing with our replacing of the 18-inch water main from, I'm going to say Penn, but it's kind of half a block past Penn. It's kind of the top of that 2nd Street project we did about 10 years ago. We'll tie on there, and we'll continue on up to K. And then next year we have another section at 2nd. So and we're planning to just carry on that 2nd Street project until we get all the way up the hill and replace that old steel main.
Thank you, thank you.
All the way up the hill?
That's what we anticipate.
All the way up the hill, Marion, like to your house?
Yeah.
It may be a few years, but we'll get there.
Okay.
I was gonna say, hey, my street needs it too, but I'm not gonna say anything.
And unofficial plug, remember, there is a lot of street projects on the ARPA agenda next Wednesday.
Yeah, we
6
know,
o'clock,
Kyle.
both streets.
All right, any more questions, comments? All right, we're gonna adjourn to executive session, so thank you.